Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
The Holy Gospel today comes from the second chapter of Matthew, verses 1 through 15. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Then when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. When I taught confirmation here at St. Luke's, just before Christmas break, I like to ask the students about the Christmas story, much like I did here at Children's Time. I ask questions like, what animal did Mary ride into Bethlehem? What did the innkeeper say to Mary and Joseph at the inn? What animals were present at Jesus' birth? Did the wise men visit Jesus at the manger? How many wise men were there? The questions were multiple choice, and they often contained some of the popular answers, like a donkey for Mary. The innkeeper told them they had no room, cows and sheep were in the manger, and that there were 3 wise men at the manger that night. But each question also had a choice D. The Bible does not say. If you're keeping score for yourself, D was the correct answer to each of those questions. The Bible does not provide us with any of those details. Yet that flies in the face of the Christmas narrative that is traditionally told, including by the very nativity scene we have in our narthex right now. Indeed, many details have been added to this story over time. Adding to the confusion, many of our secular Christmas traditions have a not-so-sacred past and history. Decking the halls with boughs of holly and Christmas trees themselves have their roots in pagan German celebrations. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was a commercial creation of Montgomery Ward's, and a spin-off from the high-flying Santa and his sleigh, whose modern image we owe to the artists of Coca-Cola. And Santa himself, or jolly old St. Nick, comes from a feisty 4th century Turkish bishop, St. Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, brewers, pawnbrokers. Hardly someone we should be leaving our kids with in the photo for Santa. For some people, the Christmas story is so intertwined with these various traditions, legends, and odd characters that it's difficult to believe any part of it is historically accurate. How do you separate the truth from the fabricated stories and traditions? Many skeptics have used these issues to cast doubt on the validity of the whole story. Did the Magi really visit the Christ child? Rest assured, I'm not taking the opportunity of Pastor Rob being gone to shoot holes in our cherished Christmas story, but rather to take a deeper look at those mysterious Magi and to reveal the ultimate truth that is told there. Professor David Fagerberg of the University of Notre Dame writes, over time, the historical account of the Magi was overgrown by legendary mythologies the way a wall might be overgrown by ivy. Yet, he maintains, we can still find the bricks beneath the ivy. The Nativity story is the beginning of the greatest story ever told, the life of Jesus Christ. It is worth the time to do some detective work and dig into the biblical roots of the story. The Bible is composed of 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New. Jewish leaders finalized the Old Testament canon around 400 BC, recognizing it as God's authoritative word. At the Council of Rome in 382, church leaders affirmed the 27 books of the New Testament, completing the Bible. Looking more closely at the New Testament, it begins with the four Gospels that tell the story of Jesus Christ. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were chosen from among many other Gospels at the time because they were the four earliest manuscripts. They were circulated broadly. They had close connections to Jesus' apostles and shared a theological consistency with core teachings. Just as important as the Gospel's similarities are some of their differences. They're written in different writing styles with a slightly different focus on the life of Jesus. And they were addressed to different audiences. Matthew to Jewish leaders, Mark to Roman readers, Luke to Greeks, and John to all of humanity. John begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and moves into the story of John the Baptist and Jesus' teachings. Similarly, Mark has no nativity story and begins with John the Baptist. Luke has the birth of Jesus with Mary and Joseph and the shepherds, but no mention of the wise men. The Gospel of Matthew, which also tells of Mary and Joseph, makes no mention of the shepherds. But in our reading today from chapter 2, tells of the visit of the Magi. So biblically, we have only this gospel in our quest to determine if the Magi are real. For 1,600 years, the stories of the Bible were seen by most Christians as historically true. Then, in the mid-17th century, scholars such as Thomas Hobbes and Benedict Spinoza began to question the accuracy and who wrote the books. The conclusion was that very little of the stories of Jesus of Nazareth were historically reliable. Similarly, questions were raised about other ancient writings such as the story of the Trojan War, Homer's The Iliad. The doubting continued into the 19th century, but soon after, the pendulum began to swing in the other direction. In 1946, a shepherd boy discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they opened a whole new understanding of the Scriptures and the ancient world. Dwight Longenecker, in his book Mystery of the Magi, addresses the question, is the Nativity story history or mystery? Scholars have questioned it, partly due to the differences in Luke's and Matthew's versions. But Dwight writes, inconsistencies in different versions of a story, however, are not necessarily evidence that the stories are all fabricated. Instead, it is far more likely that there would be no contradictions or difficulties if the stories were invented. Fiction writers make their stories line up. 2 or 3 people relating the same events are more likely to provide details that clash because they have perceived the event from different perspectives and have remembered it differently. Luke tells the story from Mary's perspective. Matthew from Joseph's. Remember, Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience who has believed for generations that they are God's chosen people. In addition to trying to convince them that Jesus is the Messiah, he is also trying to convince them of a radical truth, that one of the purposes of Jesus' life was the expansion of that chosen status to all of humanity. Longenecker explains that scholars use certain tools of deduction to determine if a particular story might be accurate. One of those tools is the criterion of dissimilarity. If a gospel depicts something that would have made believers uncomfortable because it clashes with their beliefs, it is more likely to be true. Such is the case with the Magi, because they are non-Jews coming to worship the Jewish Messiah. Good Jews and early Christians would not have expected this. A second tool is the criterion of embarrassment. If an event would have been embarrassing to the memory of Jesus or the early Christians, it again is more likely to have not been made up. Jesus' illegitimate birth is one example, and the Magi are another. As foreign magicians who were thought to engage in witchcraft, the fact that they came to worship the baby Jesus would have been an embarrassment. Further evidence that Matthew's story of the Magi is to be believed. This story began to be embellished as early as the 2nd and 3rd centuries. The Magi were transformed into kings as theologians began to reflect on Old Testament prophecies, such as Psalm 72. The king of Tarshish and the isles shall offer gifts. The kings of Arabia and Seba shall bring tribute. All kings shall pay him homage. All nations shall serve him. Or from Isaiah chapter 60, verse 6, caravans of camels that fill you, dromedaries from Midian and Ephraim, all from Sheba, shall come bearing gold and frankincense, and proclaiming the praises of the Lord. In the 5th century, a Greek chronicle identifies the Magi by name: Balthazar, Caspar, and Melchior. Names that are further immortalized when Emperor Justinian uses those names in the commissioning of a mosaic of the 3 Magi. It has the makings of a great legend. A long journey, guided by a magical star, the 3 kings join the humble shepherds to honor the Christ child. The kings worship the King of Kings. The shepherds honor the Good Shepherd. So who were the wise men? Emperor Justinian's mosaic depicted them in Persian costumes, so perhaps they were Persian Zoroastrian priests. Perhaps they were magicians, sorcerers, or stargazers. Perhaps they were kings from various kingdoms. For answers, we can turn again to Dwight Longenecker, a Catholic priest, freelance writer, and a graduate of Oxford University. His extensive research and detective work has led him to several conclusions. From today's gospel reading, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. The east to Jews in Judea would have been understood to be Arabia, where the Nabatean kingdom of Aretas IV was in power. So he contends the Magi were in fact Nabatean diplomats arriving on swift Arabian horses, not camels, coming to pay homage to the Jesus who they understood to be the divinely promised Messiah. And again from the reading, and the star they had seen when it rose and went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Astrological records suggest they may have seen a comet and witnessed the retrograde motion of Jupiter through the sky. Or it may simply be an exaggeration of what they saw. It's important to remember that the original audience for the Gospel of Matthew did not see the same division between the natural and supernatural that we do today. They likely arrived in a caravan of many, not just 3, and visited Jesus when he was about 2 years old in a house where Mary and Joseph had settled, not coming to the manger on the night he was born. Longenecker asks, does it really matter who the wise men were? His answer, yes. It matters because for too long, too many biblical scholars have insisted that the stories of the New Testament are either fanciful elaborations of simple narratives or completely fictional accounts concocted to make Jesus more special. He goes on to say that all this matters because the events of the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ are the most earth-shattering events of all time. If the gospel is historical, then it is true. If it is true, then we must confront the reality of Jesus Christ. The wise men's gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to baby Jesus are highly symbolic. Gold representing his royalty, frankincense his divinity, and myrrh, a burial spice representing his humanity, future suffering and death. Essentially, all of these foreshadowing his entire mission as king, priest, and sacrificial savior. So let's embrace the Magi and all the symbols of our traditional nativity scene, even if the details have been embellished, as reminders of the wonders of this true story that underlines it all. Amen. Be to God.